The sun had just started to rise over the small town. The sky was painted with soft colors of orange and pink, and a calm breeze moved through the trees. At the edge of the town stood a small house with a wide porch and a wooden fence. Inside that house lived a man who had spent most of his life far away from peace. Now he was learning how to live quietly, one slow morning at a time. He woke up before the alarm every day, habit not choice. For years he had been trained to do so. But here in this quiet corner of Georgia, he didn't have to answer to anyone anymore. He would step outside in his worn-out boots, take a deep breath, and listen to the world waking up. The first sound he always heard was the soft bark of his dog. The animal came running, tail wagging, eyes bright with energy. The man smiled every time. That dog was not just a pet, he was family. They had been through a lot together. The dog had once been trained for missions most people never heard about. But now both man and dog had left that world behind. Every morning they walked down the dirt road behind the house. The man carried a cup of coffee. The dog trotted beside him, stopping every now and then to sniff at the grass or chase a leaf. Neighbors sometimes waved from their yards. They didn't know much about him, only that he was polite, quiet, and liked to keep to himself. People said he must have been a soldier once. He never confirmed it. He didn't like to talk about the past. What the neighbors saw was a man living a simple life with his loyal dog. What they didn't see was the way he sometimes woke up at night, heart racing from dreams that felt too real. They didn't see how his eyes scanned the tree line every time he heard an unfamiliar car on the road. Some habits don't fade easily, but the dog, his steady companion, always brought him back to calm. The dog's presence reminded him that he had survived worse things, and now he was free to live quietly. After their walk, the man would sit on the porch steps with his dog lying beside him. The sun would be higher now, and the sound of birds filled the air. He often talked to his dog, not loudly, but with the tone of a man speaking to an old friend. "You like it here, don't you?" he'd say, patting the dog's head. The dog would lift his head and rest it on the man's knee as if agreeing. Moments like that made the man feel something close to peace, a feeling he had not known in years. Around noon he would work on small repairs around the house, fixing the fence, trimming the grass, cleaning tools, little tasks that gave structure to his day. He didn't need much. His house was modest, with simple furniture and walls lined with a few photographs. None of them showed his face in uniform. Only one photo stood on the shelf, a picture of his dog as a young pup taken long ago on a bright day. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the first time they met. Back then, he had been serving overseas. The unit had received a new dog, strong, sharp, and fearless. But the animal didn't trust anyone. The first few weeks were difficult. The dog growled, snapped, refused to follow commands. Most handlers gave up on him. But the man saw something familiar in those fierce eyes, the same distrust that had once lived in his own. Slowly, with patience, he earned the dog's trust. They became a team that no one could separate. The bond between them was built on survival, loyalty, and quiet understanding. When the man finally came home for good, he couldn't leave his companion behind. He adopted him officially, and together they began a new chapter of life. The neighbors didn't know that part of the story. To them, he was just a man who cared deeply for his dog. On weekends, he sometimes helped a few of them fix fences or haul heavy tools. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. There was something about him, a quiet strength that made people feel both safe and curious. Children who passed by his yard would wave at the dog, who always wagged his tail politely. The man would nod and smile. He liked the simplicity of those moments. One afternoon, he sat on the porch reading an old book while the dog rested nearby. The sound of cicadas filled the air, slow and lazy. It was a peaceful scene, the kind that looks ordinary but feels perfect to someone who's seen too much chaos. The man closed his eyes for a moment, thinking how lucky he was to have found this life. He didn't have many visitors, and he liked it that way. His closest neighbor, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, sometimes brought him pie or vegetables from her garden. She would chat about small things, the weather, her grandchildren, local news. He listened kindly, nodding and smiling even when his thoughts drifted elsewhere. People found comfort in his calmness, but even in quiet towns, trouble sometimes comes looking for the wrong people. It started with something small, a misunderstanding, as it often does. One evening, a delivery driver had dropped a package near his gate. The dog barked loudly, running toward the fence, protective but not aggressive. The driver, startled, backed away and told someone later that a big dog nearly attacked him. Word traveled fast, and by the next day, a few people in the area began whispering that the man kept a dangerous dog. He didn't know about these talks. He was busy with his usual routine, working in the yard, cooking simple meals, and taking care of his companion. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, the dog lay at his feet, eyes half closed. The man thought about how far they had come together. The fire crackled softly, and he ran a hand over the dog's back. "We're doing all right," he said quietly. The dog looked up, tail thumping once on the floor. The man smiled. It was enough. Early the next morning, a soft rain fell over the town. The sky was gray and the streets were empty. The man put on his jacket and opened the door. The dog stepped outside first, sniffing the damp air. They walked to the end of the driveway where the mailbox stood. Everything smelled fresh, the kind of scent that only comes after rain. As they walked back, the man noticed a police car slowly driving past the road. It wasn't unusual. The local officers often patrolled the area. But something about the way the car slowed down near his house made him pause. He didn't think much of it, though. He had nothing to hide. Later that day, he received a visit from his elderly neighbor. She looked a little uneasy. "I heard some folks called the police about your dog," she said softly. "They think he might be dangerous." I told them that's nonsense, but you know how people talk. The man thanked her for telling him and assured her that everything was fine. After she left, he sat on the porch, deep in thought. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. His dog had never harmed anyone. He made a mental note to keep the gate closed at all times, just to avoid any misunderstanding. As the days went by, life returned to its quiet rhythm. The weather grew warmer and the fields nearby turned green. The man and his dog continued their morning walks, sometimes venturing farther along the trail that led into the woods. Those walks were the highlight of his day. The forest was peaceful, tall trees, birds calling, and the gentle rustle of leaves underfoot. The dog would run ahead, then turn back every few seconds as if to check that the man was still there. It was their silent language of trust. One Sunday, as they reached a small clearing, the man stopped and looked around. The morning light filtered through the branches, making the air glow softly. He sat on a fallen log, and the dog came over, sitting by his side. "You know," he said quietly, "I think this is what peace feels like." The dog looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. In that moment, the man felt truly content. He didn't need anything else. When they returned home, he spent the afternoon cleaning his tool shed. The radio played softly in the background, old songs that reminded him of better times. The smell of wood and oil filled the air. The dog lay near the door, watching him with sleepy eyes. Every so often, the man would toss a small piece of wood, and the dog would fetch it, tail wagging happily. These small, ordinary moments were the foundation of his new life. Simple, quiet, and meaningful. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, the man cooked dinner, rice, beans, and a bit of chicken, always sharing a small piece with his dog. They ate together on the porch, watching the sky turn purple. A few crickets began to sing. The dog rested his head on the man's knee again, just like every night. The man thought about how different his life had become. Once his days had been filled with orders, danger, and constant movement. Now his greatest worry was whether the rain would return tomorrow. It was a good kind of change. He didn't know that this peace was fragile, that behind the calm surface a small spark of misunderstanding was slowly growing elsewhere. For now, he had no reason to think about it. He believed that kindness and truth would always clear up any confusion. He didn't yet know how quickly things can spiral when fear meets ignorance. But tonight wasn't about that. Tonight was about the soft glow of twilight, the quiet sound of his dog breathing beside him, and the simple joy of knowing he was home. As darkness settled, he leaned back in his chair and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear again, full of tiny lights. The dog gave a soft sigh, curling up close to his feet. The man reached down, gently brushing the dog's fur. "You're a good boy," he whispered. The dog's tail tapped once on the porch. The man smiled, closed his eyes, and listened to the crickets. The peace he felt that night would stay with him, at least for a little while longer. He couldn't have known that this quiet life, the one he built so carefully, was about to change. But for now there was only calm, The kind of calm that makes a person believe the world has finally let them rest. The man and his dog slept soundly that night side by side, unaware of what the coming days would bring. The next morning began like any other. The air was cool and a soft mist hung over the yard. The man brewed his coffee and opened the back door, letting his dog run freely around the field. The grass was wet with dew, and the dog's paws left small prints behind him as he bounded toward the trees. The man smiled, leaning on the porch rail. This was his favorite time of day, before the world got busy, before anyone had the chance to disturb the quiet. After breakfast, he planned to fix the hinges on his front gate. It had started to squeak lately, and he liked to keep things in order. He walked outside with a small toolbox, the dog trotting beside him. The morning sun was just breaking through the fog, casting a golden light over everything. He knelt to tighten the bolts, humming softly to himself. The dog stayed nearby, lying in the grass, watching him work. Every now and then, the man reached over and scratched the animal's head, murmuring a few quiet words. The sound of a car engine interrupted the calm. The man looked up, surprised. It wasn't common for anyone to drive down this part of the road so early. He stood up and saw a white pickup truck slowing down near his gate. Inside were 2 officers from the local police department. He recognized one of them, a younger man who often patrolled the area. The other was older, someone he hadn't seen before. The man wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the fence. "Morning, officers," he said politely. "Something I can help you with?" The younger officer gave a small nod. "Morning, sir. We got a call about an aggressive dog in this area. Thought we'd come check things out." The man raised his eyebrows slightly. "Aggressive? That's strange. He's right here." He gestured toward his dog, who stood calmly behind the gate, ears perked up but relaxed. The dog wasn't barking or growling, just watching, curious. The older officer leaned slightly out the window. "We just need to make sure everything's fine. Some folks nearby said they were afraid to walk past this property." The man sighed quietly, though he kept his tone calm. "I understand. But he's never hurt anyone. He's trained. And this is private property, or he's always behind the fence." The officers exchanged a glance. The younger one nodded slowly. "All right. Just doing our job, sir. Mind if we take a quick look around?" The man paused. Something about the request didn't feel right, but he didn't want to cause trouble. "Sure," he said finally. "Come through the gate. I'll keep him close." He whistled softly, and the dog came immediately to his side. The officers got out of the truck and stepped through the gate, their boots crunching on the gravel. The dog stood beside the man, alert but calm. The younger officer seemed at ease, but the older one kept his hand near his hip, as if ready for something that wasn't there. The man noticed this and spoke gently. "He's friendly. You don't have to worry." The officer gave a small, uncertain nod, just being cautious. They walked a few steps into the yard, looking around. The morning was still quiet, except for birds in the distance. The man explained that his dog was a retired service animal, disciplined and obedient. He even showed them how the dog followed commands, sitting and staying perfectly still when told. The younger officer seemed impressed. "That's a good dog," he said. "Best partner I ever had," the man replied with a small smile. The moment felt lighter after that. They talked for another few minutes, mostly about keeping the gate secure and how some neighbors overreact when they hear barking. When the conversation ended, the officers thanked him for his time and headed back to their truck. The man watched them go, then knelt beside his dog, patting his side. "See, nothing to worry about," he said softly. "People just get nervous sometimes." The rest of the day passed peacefully. He finished fixing the gate and spent the afternoon stacking firewood. The sun was warm and the dog followed him everywhere, resting in the shade whenever the man worked too long. Later, as evening fell, they sat on the porch again, watching the light fade from the sky. It was one of those quiet nights that made the man believe everything would stay calm. But the next morning, things changed. He was in the kitchen making breakfast when he heard a knock at the door, and firm and quick. He wiped his hands and went to open it. Outside stood the same 2 officers, joined by a third one this time. Their faces looked serious. "Morning again, sir," said the younger officer, his tone polite but uneasy. "We got another call last night about your dog. Someone said he got out and scared a woman walking her child." The man frowned, confused. "That's impossible. The gate's locked every night. He never leaves my sight. "I believe you," the officer said, "but we have to follow up. Maybe someone saw another dog and assumed it was yours." The older officer stepped forward slightly. "We'll need to see the dog again, just for the record." The man hesitated, then nodded. "All right." "He's in the yard." He opened the door, calling softly for his dog. The animal trotted over, tail wagging, calm as ever. The officers stepped back a little as the dog appeared, though he showed no signs of aggression. The younger officer made a note on his clipboard. "Looks healthy and calm to me," he said quietly. The man crossed his arms, tired but still respectful. "I hope this clears things up. He's not causing anyone trouble." The older officer's voice was firm. "We'll file the report. But if we get another call, animal control might have to step in." The man nodded slowly, trying to stay composed. "Understood." When they left, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, feeling a heaviness in his chest. It wasn't anger, and more a quiet worry. He had done everything right, but somehow people still saw danger where there was none. He looked down at his dog, who tilted his head as if sensing his unease. "We'll be all right," the man said softly. "We always are." Over the next few days, life returned to normal, though the man noticed more police cars driving through the neighborhood. He didn't like it, but he ignored it. He had learned long ago that some battles aren't worth fighting. He kept to himself, stayed polite, and continued his quiet routine. One evening, as he was preparing dinner, he heard voices outside. Through the window, he saw two officers standing by the road, talking to a neighbor. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but their glances toward his house told him enough. He felt a familiar tension in his shoulders, the same alertness that used to come before a mission. He shook it off and went back to cooking. He didn't want to live in fear again. Later that night, he sat by the fireplace, the dog lying at his feet. The firelight danced on the walls. The man thought about the years he had spent serving his country, the long missions, the discipline, the trust between teammates. He thought about how his dog had once been his lifeline in those dangerous moments. Now all he wanted was to live quietly, to honor that bond in peace. It hurt him that others couldn't see the same loyalty and gentleness in his companion that he did. Rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then steady. The sound filled the silence, and the man felt calmer. He reached down and ran a hand through his dog's fur. "You and me," he whispered. "That's all we need." The next morning was gray and damp. The man dressed in his old jacket and boots, ready to check the fence again. The rain had made the ground muddy. The dog followed close behind as they walked the perimeter. Everything looked fine. The latch was strong, the boards were secure. He took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. For a moment, he felt that same peace again. He didn't know that someone had made another call that morning. A jogger passing through had seen the dog near the gate and assumed he was loose. The jogger didn't stop to check. They simply called the police, saying there was a big dog running free and barking aggressively. By the time the man went inside to warm his hands, 2 patrol cars were already heading his way. He was in the kitchen, making tea when he saw flashing lights through the window. He sighed, setting the cup down. "Again?" he murmured. The dog stood beside him, ears perked. The man walked to the front door, stepping out onto the porch. The officers were already outside their vehicles, calling out from the road. "Sir, can we talk to you?" one of them said. "Of course," the man replied, trying to stay calm. He walked toward the gate, hands visible, his voice steady. "Is this about the dog again?" "Yes, sir," one of them said. "We received another complaint." The man took a breath. "He hasn't left the yard. You can check the gate yourself." The dog stood a few feet behind him, silent and alert. The morning felt heavier somehow. The air thick with tension the man couldn't explain. Still, he stayed polite, hoping the misunderstanding would clear up once and for all. "You can come in and see for yourself," he said. The officers hesitated for a moment, glancing at each other before stepping forward. The man opened the gate slowly, making sure his dog stayed beside him. "Stay," he said quietly, and the dog obeyed immediately. The officers walked in, eyes scanning the yard. The man kept his hands relaxed at his sides, doing everything he could to appear calm and respectful. Inside, though, he felt something uneasy. Not fear exactly, but a deep sense that peace was slipping away, piece by piece, for reasons he couldn't control. He didn't know this morning would become a turning point. For now, he just stood there, the dog beside him, both waiting for the world to remember that not every sound or shadow is a threat. The man looked down at his dog, who stared back with steady eyes. Easy, boy, he whispered. We'll get through this. The dog's tail moved once, slow and gentle as if agreeing. And with that, another quiet morning began to change. One small misunderstanding at a time. The kind that grows not from truth, but from fear. The morning sun was hidden behind thick clouds. The air felt heavy, like the sky was waiting for something to happen. The man stood on his porch looking at the two police officers who had just entered his yard. His dog sat quietly beside him, obedient as always. The officers didn't seem hostile, but their movements were tense, cautious in a way that made the man uneasy. He spoke first, trying to keep his voice calm. You can check whatever you need to check. He's not a danger to anyone. The younger officer nodded politely, though his eyes darted between the man and the dog. We just want to make sure everything's fine, sir. We've had a few calls this week. The man crossed his arms, sighing softly. I know, I've heard. But you've seen him before, he's calm. I keep him inside the fence always. The older officer gave a small nod, but his hand stayed close to his radio. We understand, but sometimes people get scared easily. We have to follow procedure. The dog stayed where he was, sitting still with his ears up. His tail moved once, slow and calm, as if sensing the man's quiet frustration. The man looked down at him for a moment, then back at the officers. I've lived here for years, he said. Never had any trouble until recently. Maybe someone new in the area doesn't know him. The younger officer wrote something in a small notebook. That might be it. We just need to check your fence and make sure it's secure. Go ahead, the man said. I've already checked it myself. The officers walked the length of the fence while the man stood near the porch. He didn't like strangers poking around his home, but he reminded himself that they were just doing their job. The dog stayed at his side, alert but patient. After a few minutes, the officers came back. Looks fine, the younger one said. You've done a good job keeping it up. Thank you, the man said quietly. The older officer's tone softened. We'll make a note in the system that your dog is trained and under control. Hopefully that'll stop the calls. The man nodded, feeling a bit of relief. I'd appreciate that. They exchanged a few more polite words before the officers left. The man watched the patrol car disappear down the road, then looked at his dog. Guess that's that, he said, patting his companion's head. The dog gave a small wag of his tail as if agreeing. He tried to move on with his day, pushing aside the uneasy feeling that had lingered since the first complaint. He spent the morning cleaning the shed and sorting through old boxes. Every so often he'd glance toward the road, half expecting another visitor, but the street stayed empty. By afternoon, the sun had broken through the clouds and the world felt lighter again. That evening, he cooked dinner like he always did. Simple food, shared quietly with his dog. They sat on the porch afterward, watching the light fade. The crickets began their evening song, and the smell of rain drifted from somewhere far off. The man leaned back in his chair, letting the peace wash over him. We're all right now, he said softly. The dog rested his head on his knee, eyes half closed. For a while, everything felt steady again. The next few days passed without interruption. No calls, no visitors, just quiet. The man began to believe that things had finally settled. He worked on the garden, repaired a loose shutter, and even went into town for groceries. Something he didn't do often. A few people nodded at him politely, though he noticed one or two avoid his eyes. He didn't take it personally. People believed what they wanted to believe. As long as he and his dog were safe, that was all that mattered. Back home, life returned to routine. Each morning began with a walk down the trail, the same dirt road lined with trees and wildflowers. The dog walked close, tail wagging, occasionally stopping to sniff something. The man found comfort in that rhythm, the simple act of walking together in silence. He talked sometimes, not expecting a response, but knowing his companion understood anyway. One afternoon, while fixing the back fence, he heard a car stop near his gate. He looked up expecting to see a neighbor, but it was someone he didn't recognize, a young woman holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as an officer from Animal Control. Her tone was friendly but professional. Sir, she said, we've had a few reports about your dog. I just need to verify that he's properly registered and up to date on vaccinations. The man felt a mix of irritation and weariness, but he kept his tone even. He is. All his papers are inside. Would you mind showing me? Of course. He called his dog to stay by the porch while he went inside. He returned a minute later with a folder. The woman looked through the documents carefully, nodding as she read. Everything looks good, she said. He's registered and fully vaccinated. Sorry for the trouble. No problem, the man said, though his voice was tight. I just wish people would ask before calling. She gave a small smile. Sometimes folks overreact. It's a small town. Things spread fast, he nodded. I've noticed. Before leaving, she reached down and gently petted the dog. He seems like a good boy, she said. The best, the man replied quietly. After she drove off, he stood by the fence for a long moment, staring at the empty road. The peace he had worked so hard to build suddenly felt fragile again, like a glass that could shatter at any time. He sighed, then turned to his dog. We'll just keep living our life, he said softly. Let them talk. That evening a storm rolled in. Rain came down hard, tapping against the roof and windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The man sat by the window, watching lightning flash across the sky. The dog lay nearby, head resting on his paws, calm as ever. The man smiled faintly. You're not scared of anything, are you? The dog opened one eye and looked at him, tail thumping once. The man chuckled quietly. Didn't think so. The next morning, the air smelled fresh after the storm. Puddles glimmered in the driveway, and birds chirped loudly in the trees. The man made breakfast and poured a second cup of coffee, savoring the quiet. He thought about maybe painting the porch later, something he'd been putting off. The dog sat near the window, watching the world with calm eyes. Around mid-morning, a knock sounded on the door again. The man's first thought was that it might be the mail carrier or a neighbor, but when he opened it, he saw two men in plain clothes holding badges. One of them spoke first. Sir, we're from the county office. We need to ask a few questions regarding a recent incident. The man frowned slightly. What incident? There was a report yesterday from someone claiming your dog frightened them near the post office. The man blinked in surprise. That can't be right. He's never even been near the post office. I don't take him into town. The officers exchanged a look. That's what we need to clarify. He invited them inside, though his stomach tightened with unease. They asked questions about where he'd been, what time he'd gone out, whether anyone else might have access to his yard. He answered honestly, showing them his schedule and even the camera footage from the small security system he had set up. The video clearly showed the dog in the yard all day. After reviewing it, the men seemed satisfied. That clears things up, one said. Looks like it might have been a case of mistaken identity. The man exhaled slowly, trying to hide his frustration. I hope so. I don't want any more confusion. They thanked him for his time and left. Once the door closed, he sat down heavily in his chair, rubbing his temples. It wasn't just the false reports that bothered him. It was the feeling of being watched, misunderstood, judged for something he hadn't done. He looked over at his dog, who was lying on the rug, tail tapping gently. They don't know you, he said softly. If they did, they wouldn't be afraid. The rest of the day he kept himself busy. Work helped him quiet his thoughts. He fixed the porch railing, swept the floor, and mended an old coat. But beneath it all, a faint worry lingered. The peace of the past months felt thinner now, more delicate. He had learned to live quietly, to trust that kindness and patience could mend misunderstandings. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something he couldn't yet name. That evening, he received a call from the local animal control office confirming that his records were now fully verified, and that there should be no further inspections unless a serious complaint came in. That news brought a wave of relief. He thanked the caller politely and hung up. Then he walked outside to where his dog was sitting on the porch looking at the sunset. The sky was golden, streaked with purple clouds. The dog's fur glowed in the light. The man sat beside him, quiet for a while. Then he spoke softly. I think we're in the clear now. Maybe they'll finally leave us alone. The dog leaned slightly against him and the man smiled. We've been through worse, he said. We'll be fine. As night fell, the air cooled. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass and the steady sound of crickets filled the air. The man leaned back, feeling the calm he had missed. He thought about how easily fear can twist simple things into problems that don't exist. He thought about the world, how people sometimes rush to judge what they don't understand. But he also thought about kindness and how one patient word could stop a storm before it starts. He reached down and scratched his dog's ears. You've taught me that, he said softly. Patience, loyalty, peace. The dog gave a slow, contented sigh. The man smiled again, closing his eyes for a moment. The peace felt real again, fragile, but real. Somewhere down the road, a car passed, its headlights glowing faintly through the trees. The man didn't flinch this time. He simply watched the lights fade, his hand resting gently on his companion's back. The night settled around them like a blanket, calm, quiet, and still. For now, everything was all right again. The world had tested him, but he had stayed steady. The peace he wanted was still his, at least for now, and as the stars appeared one by one above the dark trees, the man whispered the same quiet promise he made every night. "We'll be okay." The days that followed were quiet again. The man settled back into his usual rhythm, morning walks, small repairs around the house, and evenings spent on the porch with his loyal dog. The tension from the past weeks began to fade, like a storm that had finally passed. He told himself things were fine now. People would forget, and life would return to normal. Each morning, the first thing he did was step outside and breathe in the fresh air. The world always felt new at that hour. The dog would stretch and shake off sleep before trotting toward the fence, waiting for their walk. The man would smile, sipping his coffee as the sky turned from pink to gold. It was his favorite time of day, when everything was calm and nothing had yet gone wrong. One morning, while walking down the dirt road, he saw a neighbor he hadn't talked to in months. The neighbor waved from across the street, a bit awkwardly. "Morning," the man called out. "Morning," the neighbor replied. After a pause, he added, "Heard things got a little tense around here lately. Hope it's all settled." The man nodded. "It's fine now, just some confusion. People worry too much." The neighbor chuckled softly. "That's true. Folks around here talk more than they should." "Talking doesn't bother me," the man said, "as long as they leave us in peace." The two exchanged a few more polite words before parting ways. As he continued walking, the man thought about how quickly rumors could change people's minds. But he refused to let it bother him. He had faced far worse situations in his life. He believed that calm, quiet actions always spoke louder than anger. When they returned home, the man fed his dog and went to work on a new project. He was building a small wooden shed in the back, mostly to store tools and gardening supplies. He liked having something to focus on. The sound of the hammer, the smell of sawdust, and the feeling of wood under his hands gave him peace. The dog stayed close, watching or napping nearby. The days passed like that, simple, steady, and full of small routines. But sometimes late at night, when the house was dark and quiet, the man would sit by the window and think. He thought about how strange life could be. After everything he had done, after years of risking his life to protect others, he had come home to fight a battle made of rumors and misunderstanding. Still, he didn't hold anger. He knew that people feared what they didn't understand. He had seen that truth many times before. One evening, while he was reading on the porch, the phone rang. It was a call from the local newspaper. The reporter had heard about the incident with the dog and wanted to set the record straight. The man hesitated at first, but then agreed to talk, hoping it might help clear things up once and for all. The next morning, a journalist came by. She was polite and respectful, asking questions about his life and his dog. He told her a little, not about his past in the service, but about the quiet life he was trying to build, and how much his companion meant to him. "He's more than a dog," the man said softly. "He's my family. He's the reason I still sleep at night." The journalist smiled and nodded. "People will understand that," she said. A week later, the article appeared in the local paper. The headline read, "Veteran and his loyal dog seek peace after misunderstanding." It was a kind piece written with empathy. It described him as a quiet, disciplined man who wanted nothing more than to live a simple, honest life. It mentioned his dog's training and calm nature, and how neighbors had misunderstood his protective behavior. When the man read it, he felt something lift from his shoulders. For the first time in months, people might finally see the truth. Over the next few days, a few neighbors stopped by to apologize or simply to say hello. Some brought small gifts, baked bread, fresh fruit, even dog treats. The man accepted them all with quiet gratitude. One neighbor, a retired teacher, said, "I'm sorry it took so long for folks to see who you really are. That was a good article." The man smiled modestly. "Sometimes it takes a little light to show what's real." The days that followed were filled with warmth. The dog seemed happier too, sensing the change. People waved as the man passed by during his walks. Children who used to avoid his fence now stopped to watch the dog play. It felt like peace, real peace this time. Then one afternoon, as the man was painting the new shed, a black SUV pulled into his driveway. It wasn't local law enforcement. The plates and clean look of the vehicle told him otherwise. He set down the paintbrush and wiped his hands. Two men stepped out, dressed in plain clothes, moving with a quiet confidence that told him exactly who they were. They weren't strangers to his kind of life. One of them offered a polite smile. "Sir, sorry to drop in unannounced. We're from a federal office. Just routine follow-up on your record. We wanted to check on how you're adjusting." The man tilted his head, cautious but calm. "Adjusting to what?" "Civilian life," the agent replied. "Your background shows you were part of several classified operations. We just check in occasionally to make sure things are stable. Nothing more." The man nodded slowly. "I appreciate that. Things are stable. I'm fine here." They spoke for a while, mostly formal questions, about health, routine, whether he felt supported. The man answered honestly. The agent seemed satisfied. Before they left, one of them glanced toward the dog lying nearby and smiled. "He's trained well." "He's the best there is," the man said quietly. The visit stirred up memories, but it also reminded him of who he was, of everything he had endured and overcome. He wasn't just an ordinary man living in a small town. He was someone who had led people through situations most could never imagine. But here, he didn't need anyone to know that. His strength didn't come from his past anymore. It came from his peace. That evening, he took a longer walk than usual. The air was cool and smelled of pine. The dog walked beside him, occasionally looking up as if to check on him. "I'm all right," the man said softly. "Just thinking." He looked up at the fading light and smiled faintly. "Sometimes life gives you battles even when you're done fighting." They reached the old trail that led to the river. The water was calm, reflecting the last light of day. The man sat on a large rock near the edge, listening to the gentle movement of water. The dog lay beside him, head resting on his paws. For a long while, neither of them moved. The world was perfectly quiet. When they returned home, the man felt lighter. The visit from the agents had reminded him of his discipline, how to stay calm, observant, and careful. It was a part of him that never left. He checked his fences again that night, not out of fear but out of habit. Everything was in place. The dog followed him as he locked up, then curled up near the door when they went inside. The next morning, the man received a letter. It was from a veterans organization he hadn't heard from in years. They had seen the article in the paper and wanted to invite him to a local event honoring service members. At first, he wasn't sure. He liked his privacy. But then he thought about how much good it could do, how maybe it would remind people that strength doesn't always look the way they expect. A week later, he attended the event. It was held at a community center, simple and warm. He wore a clean shirt and his old watch. When he walked in, a few heads turned. Some recognized him from the article. The organizer greeted him kindly, and people clapped as his name was called. He wasn't used to attention anymore, but he accepted it with quiet grace. When they asked him to speak, he hesitated. But then he stood and said a few words. "I've learned that peace isn't given," he began. "It's something you build, with patience, kindness, and understanding. Sometimes people will fear what they don't know, but if you stay steady, the truth always finds its way through." The crowd applauded. Some stood. It wasn't pride that filled him, but gratitude. Gratitude that his story had found meaning beyond misunderstanding. That night, when he came home, he sat on the porch with his dog and looked at the stars. The world felt still again. The sound of crickets rose and fell in the distance. He reached down and brushed his hand over his companion's fur. "We did all right," he whispered. The dog lifted his head, eyes calm and trusting. The man smiled softly. "We've come a long way." The air was cool, and the moonlight painted everything silver. For the first time in months, he felt fully at ease. The fears of the past weeks had faded, replaced by quiet pride and peace. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The dog rested beside him, content. Somewhere down the road, a light flickered in a neighbor's window. A reminder that life went on and,